Good evening and welcome to News Night. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to be on his way to represent India in two crucial international summits, the G20 and COP26. Recovery from the pandemic, climate action, global security scenario are some of the key issues in focus, and India's voice and stand assume critical importance. Our focus on that in the show up ahead. That and much more. First, the top stories at this hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to embark on a 5-day visit to Italy and United Kingdom tonight. PM to attend the 16th G20 Summit and the World Leader Summit of COP26. Prime Minister says he will participate in dialogue on pandemic, sustainable development, global economy and health governance. COP26 will explore possibilities for further accelerating clean growth. PM Modi is participating in G20 Summit on invitation by Italian Prime Minister. Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla says discussions will focus on global economic recovery and security matters like cross-border terrorism and terror funding. In the second leg of his visit, Prime Minister Modi will reach Glasgow to attend COP26 Climate Summit. India will push for timely implementation of Paris Agreement guidelines to limit global temperature rise. Prime Minister Narendra Modi attends 18th ASEAN India Summit virtually, says unity and centrality of ASEAN is of prime importance to India. In cruise ship drugs case, Aryan Khan gets bail from Bombay High Court. Munmun Dhamecha and Arbaz merchant to be released as well. NCB witness Kiran Gosavi detained in fraud case. Home Ministry extends countrywide COVID restrictions till November 30th amid apprehensions of rise in infections. Directs states to exercise caution in permitting public functions. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi is first travelling to Rome, starting tonight to take part in the G20 Summit, the most powerful grouping in the world, covering about 80% of global GDP and 60% of the population. India is a founding member of G20 organization and has always raised issues pertaining to developing countries. Prime Minister is likely to highlight issues ranging from global health governance to tax evasion to climate change. Here's more.
As leaders of the 20 biggest economies of the world gather here in Rome over the weekend for the 16th G20 Summit, they will be primarily focusing on achieving global health and economic recovery, sustainable development and climate change. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, during his interventions at the G20 sessions, will stress upon setting realistic and achievable targets and countries then honoring their commitments. He could also appeal to the developed world to reduce their divergences with the developing world and look at climate financing and put in a model for achieving transfer of technology and climate financing, especially to the developing and the least developed countries.
In the first leg of his visit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the G20 Summit in Rome, Italy from 30 to 31st of October at the invitation of the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. The summit will be attended by leaders of G20 countries, the European Union and other invited countries and representatives of international organizations. This time, the focus is going to be on economic recovery after the corona pandemic.
Italy's theme for its presidency is People, Planet, Prosperity. It actually comes from the 2030 UN Agenda for Sustainable Development. There are 5 Ps here, but Italy has chosen to retain the 3 Ps as being the theme for the G20 Summit. And the focus of Italy is on recovery from the pandemic and strengthening global health governance, economic recovery and resilience, climate change and energy transition, and sustainable development and food security.
This will be the 8th G20 summit meeting of Prime Minister Modi as Prime Minister. Before that, Prime Minister Modi has represented India in this conference 7 times. India is a founding member of the G20 organization and has always raised the issues pertaining to the developing countries. Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla added that India has been a party to reforms in global institutions from global governance. Referring to the efforts made by India at the time of Corona, the Foreign Secretary said that India will put issues like global health governance on the G20 platform.
The thrust of the upcoming summit will be on economic and health recovery, climate change and sustainable development. We are now close to the second year of our dealing with the pandemic. Obviously, the devastation it has caused cannot be overstated. It is therefore not surprising that the Italian presidency has kept its focus on recovery and, of course, economic and health recovery both. They have already set the stage for an ambitious agenda on global health governance with a parallel focus on recovery from the ongoing crisis and preparing for the future health crises that may emerge.
The Foreign Secretary said there will be inclusive talks on many pertinent issues including tax evasion and climate change. India will also call for consensus among the countries on the basis of approval of the authenticity of the vaccine so that people do not face inconvenience in international travel.
There is unanimity in the G20 on building back from the pandemic by focusing on job creation, skill development, and I think this is an important part of the overall discussions and the agenda that will be there. Women's empowerment, increased participation in women's workforce, also for international travel. I think that is an important point. Resumption of international travel through mutual recognition of national vaccine documents. This has been our proposal, and there is strong support within emerging market economies in the group in this regard.
Prime Minister Modi will also hold bilateral meetings with the heads of many countries during his visit to Italy and Glasgow. The G20 organization represents 80% of the world's global GDP, 75% of global trade and 60% of the world's population.
This year's theme, People, Planet and Prosperity, primarily means health recovery as far as people goes, prosperity, economic recovery and planet, climate change. Amritpal Singh, DD India, Italy.
And Prime Minister's second stop will be Glasgow in the UK to attend the COP26 summit. World leaders will gather to take stock of collective climate action to check global warming. United Nations a few days ago suggested that the world needs to do much more to avert an impending climate catastrophe in the coming decades. As Prime Minister presents the ambitious climate targets and environment-friendly initiatives by India, he is likely to present the key challenges faced by developing countries in mitigating climate change as well. Here's more. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit UK to participate in the World Leaders Summit of COP26 in Glasgow. COP26 UN Climate Change Conference will take place from 31st October to 12th November 2021 in the UK. In the light of the worldwide effects of COVID-19, it was decided to reschedule the conference initially slated for November of 2020.
It is expected to be attended by heads of state and government of more than 120 countries. So fairly wide representation at this summit. By way of background, the UNFCCC concluded in 1992. It embodies the global will and vision to combat climate change. For 3 decades, the UN has been bringing together almost every country in the world for global climate change summits called the Conference of Parties. These Conference of Parties provide opportunity for stock taking, charting the way forward to combat climate change.
On the sidelines, Prime Minister will have key bilaterals with world leaders, including UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. PM Modi will address the Leaders Summit and, along with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, jointly launch the ambitious transnational solar grid initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid.
One of the important events is the launch of the Global Green Grids Initiative, the One Sun, One World, One Grid of the International Solar Alliance. The Prime Minister will also separately launch the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, or IRIS, an initiative of the Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure for island countries. This is primarily for small island developing states, This will be launched with the two other co-chairs, the UK Prime Minister and the Australian Prime Minister.
Prime Minister will highlight India's climate actions and engage with many leaders for completion of Paris Agreement implementation guidelines, mobilization of finance, actions to strengthen climate adaptation, technology development and transfer and importance of sustainable lifestyles.
COP21 in Paris did have certain commitments that were to be fulfilled. I'm happy to say that India has been one of the best performers in the G20 as far as meeting commitments of COP26 are concerned. We are well on our way to meeting our NDC commitments and even doing better than that. So from our perspective, our commitments have been very much in place. Not only have we committed to NDCs at Paris, we have also made unilateral, I would say, announcements that really set the benchmark much higher.
UN Climate Change Conference COP26 is a crucial opportunity to achieve pivotal, transformational change in global climate policy and action. COP26 comes against the background of widespread, rapid and intensifying climate change impacts, which are already impacting every part of the world. The meeting comprises 26th session of Conference of Parties COP26. Bureau Report, DD India. And Prime Minister will be visiting Rome, Italy and Vatican City from 29 to 31st October 2021 at the invitation of Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, following which he will travel to Glasgow, United Kingdom from 1st to 2nd November 2021 at the invitation of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His departure statement gives an insight into the core issues that will be prominently highlighted by India during the two important summits. About G20 statement, Prime Minister's statement says, and I'm going to highlight the key points. He says, I will join other G20 leaders in discussions on global economic and health recovery from the pandemic, sustainable development, climate change. This will be first in-person summit of G20 since the outbreak of the pandemic in 2020. Will allow us to take stock of current global situation and exchange ideas on how the G20 can be an engine for strengthening economic resilience and building back inclusively and sustainably from the pandemic. During my visit to Italy, I will also visit the Vatican City to call on His Holiness Pope Francis and meet Secretary of State, His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin. On the sidelines of the G20, I will also meet leaders of other partner countries and review progress in India's bilateral ties with them. And at the 26th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Prime Minister will be participating in the high-level segment of COP26 titled World Leaders Summit on 2nd November 2021, along with 120 heads of states and governments from around the world. The statement says, and I quote, in the World Leaders Summit, in line with our tradition of living in harmony with nature and culture of deep respect for the planet, we are taking ambitious action, Prime Minister says, on expanding clean and renewable energy, energy efficiency, afforestation, biodiversity. Today, India is creating new records in collective effort for climate adaptation, mitigation, resilience, forging multilateral alliances. India is among the top countries in the world in terms of installed renewable energy, wind and solar energy capacity. I will share India's excellent track record on climate action and our achievements. I will also highlight the need to comprehensively address climate change issues, including equitable distribution of carbon space, support for mitigation and adaptation and resilience building measures, mobilization of finance, technology transfer, and importance of sustainable lifestyles for green and inclusive growth. PM says COP26 summit will provide an opportunity to meet all the stakeholders, including leaders of partner countries, innovators, intergovernmental organizations, and explore the possibilities for further accelerating clean growth. And despite the challenges common to developing countries in mitigating climate change, India had set and is also on track to meet and exceed its goals as per the Paris Agreement. Natural Resources Defence Council, an international non-profit organisation, has compiled a special report that shows India is indeed walking the talk as far as climate commitments are concerned. Here's how.
India is largely on track to meet and even exceed its Paris Climate Agreement targets, according to a new report by Natural Resources Defence Council, an international non-profit organisation. The Nrdc, in its annual review of India's actions on climate change titled "The Road from Paris, India's Progress Towards its Climate Pledge," said that the country is likely to meet its target of reducing emissions by 33 to 35% of its GDP by 2030 from the 2005 levels and achieve 40% of its installed power capacity from non-fossil fuels by 2030, with some more work to do on its goal of creating an additional carbon sink. Salient features of the report indicate that India is indeed walking the talk and is serious about honouring its climate commitments. Though fossil fuels still account for the majority of India's power generation, the share of thermal capacity has decreased to 60.7%. Factoring in large hydro and nuclear, India's fossil fuel-free power totaled 39.3% of the country's installed capacity, nearly equal to the 2030 goal. Rapidly growing renewables, the share of installed capacity from renewable energy sources has increased to 26% in August 2021, while the share of thermal capacity is at about 60.7%. Hydrogen mission gaining steam to support its clean energy transition, India has launched a new hydrogen mission which explores how green hydrogen can be utilized by existing end users of hydrogen. Increasingly competitive solar power, tariffs for solar energy projects reached record lows of 1.99 rupees per kilowatt hour at a December 2020 auction. Advancing electric mobility under phase 2 of the faster adoption and manufacture of electric vehicle scheme, India has allocated 10,000 crore rupees to advance electric mobility as well as electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Advancing energy efficient buildings. As of July 2021, 18 states and 2 union territories have notified the Energy Conservation Building Code (ECBC). Ratifying cooling action plans in August 2021, India committed to ratifying the Kigali Amendment, the global pact to phase down super climate polluting hydrocarbons (HFCs), reducing air pollution as part of its goal to achieving a 20 to 30% air pollution reduction by 2024. India launched a national clean air program in 2019 and allocated funds to states for reducing air pollution under 2020 and 2021 budgets. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the upcoming International Climate Conference on COP26 in Glasgow, which will be held from October 31st to November 12th. Bureau Report, DD India.
And United States climate envoy John Kerry has said that the world was not yet fully aligned with what science says needs to be done to avoid the worst consequences of climate crisis. Kerry says this at the London School of Economics on Thursday. Kerry's speech comes ahead of United Nations Climate Summit, known as COP26, which is seen as a vital to tackling the threat of rising temperatures across the world.
The real cost that no one is willing to pay is the cost of inaction. The world must work together to close this gap, but particular responsibility lies with the top 20 economies of the world, all of whom are responsible for 80% of all the emissions.
And let's talk more about the very crucial summits coming up, G20 and COP26. First, let's go across live to Rome, Italy, which is hosting the G20 summit this year. My colleague Amritpal Singh is present in Rome. Amrit, in a day's time, world leaders will gather in the city. Take us through how Rome is preparing for the G20 summit, particularly in terms of the very crucial ideas and decisions that need to be made.
That's right, Shubhendu. Rome is all decked up to welcome the world leaders of the world's 20 largest economies who gather here for the 16th G20 summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be arriving here in Italy early tomorrow morning by Italy time. He's leaving India late tonight and he'll be flying in tomorrow morning, early morning Italy time. The Prime Minister has a few bilaterals lined up for tomorrow, and as you know, the day after the summit begins, where these leaders will participate. Essentially, the leaders will deliberate upon economic recovery, health recovery for the people, also sustainable development, and the issue of climate change. This is what the deliberations would primarily be focused on, apart from, as the Foreign Secretary today in his press briefing said, that cross-border terrorism and the situation in Afghanistan is likely to figure both in the bilateral talks and also when the world leaders meet together, because the biggest dilemma before the world leaders today is how to deal with the evolving humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, whether or not to give recognition to Taliban, given their track record, given that how they have not lived up to the assurances that they made to the Americans and NATO. The sort of inclusive government that was expected from the Taliban to be formed, the rights of women, minorities in Afghanistan. So these are issues which weigh on the minds of world leaders as they gather for the weekend summit. And if they do not decide to give recognition, diplomatic recognition, how to reach the Afghan people, how do world bodies like the UN's World Food Program, etc., ensures food reaches, medicines reach, essential supplies reach the Afghan people, and they are equitably distributed. So these are questions which will be on the minds of world leaders as they gather here in Rome for the 16th G20 summit.
Right. Amrit, we understand G20 is a grouping of leading economies of the world. You mentioned economic recovery, global economic recovery is high on the agenda. What is the kind of direction it is likely to change? Because we know the kind of impact that the pandemic has had on every single country. Now we're talking about a recovery which is equally beneficial to all members. But what kind of shape and direction is it likely to take?
Well, the leaders will discuss as to how there could be a united approach towards economic recovery, which is based on inclusive growth. And sharing of resources, sharing of technologies. For example, the Prime Minister is likely to offer that India can offer its technological expertise, which is used very effectively during the COVID pandemic to reach out to people. Its experiences, its capacity to produce vaccines, especially for parts of the world who do not have access or do not have adequate access to vaccines. Collaborations on economic front, opening up of travel restrictions, mutual recognition of vaccination certificates, so that borders can open up, travel can open up, businesses can open up, how to root out black money and the round tripping of money, black money that happens. So how to strengthen those systems. So basically a united approach towards dealing with economic recovery. Remember, G20 was formed after the 2008 crisis, because though the 2008 crisis began in the United States, but it went on to affect the whole world. In an interconnected global village that we live in today, what happens in one part of the planet does affect every other part of the planet.
Absolutely.
The COVID pandemic is an apt and a recent example of that. So essentially building linkages, putting in infrastructure and putting in mechanisms where cooperation can happen and you can form a collective a bulwark against economic downturn, and how to come out of economic
Amrit. And now also, Amrit, the G20
not on any single country, but the whole world.
Amrit, G20 also assumes importance this edition in the context of what is to follow, the COP26. And the recent UN report doesn't speak well about the kind of effort that G20 as a grouping has made as far as climate change initiatives are concerned. So that also is going to be a high priority as leaders move from the G20 to the COP26.
Absolutely. If you look at this year's theme, it is people, planet and prosperity. When they talk about planet, it's basically, sustainable development and climate change that affect the planet. And that's the biggest challenge. As you mentioned, the UN report very clearly mentions that G20 as a grouping has been found wanting on effective action to arrest climate change. So there will be deliberations on that. India would be pushing for a concrete action plan to deal with the situation and setting achievable and realistic targets for achieving or arresting climate change. Also, the issue of climate financing and technology transfer from the developed world to the developing world and the least developed countries, because when global emissions, if they are up in any part of the world, they affect the climate in totality. So it cannot be one country taking a responsibility or doing their part. It is everybody who has to collectively commit to that, and more importantly than committing, honoring those commitments. And you're very right that the G20, the report clearly says that G20 has been found wanting. The leaders would once again stress on the need for putting the divergences aside, building a consensus which is realistic, achievable, and countries, when they go back from G20, honor them. As the COP26 follows the G20 meet, where it will be in sharp focus, so G20 will do a sort of background building for that.
All right, there, Amrit, thanks very much for taking us through the broad contours and what is to be expected at the G20 and also later at COP26. Thanks very much, Amrit, for joining us with those points from Rome. And we continue our conversation about the G20 and the COP26. Let's look at our issue in focus this evening, G20 and COP26, the road ahead. Two eminent guests are joining me for this conversation. Manjeev Puri, former senior diplomat, and Sabha Kalam, Program Manager, Climate Change and Energy, UNDP India. That's the theme that we are going to deliberate on in the next few minutes. Good evening and warm welcome to both of you. Ambassador Puri, if I can begin with you, how do you map the importance of this edition of G20? Host of critical issues, whether it is the pandemic and the recovery from it, the economic crisis, the impending climate catastrophe. One can't just name a few. How do you see G20 this edition being absolutely crucial?
I think that's a very important question. The G20, when it was born at the leaders' level, the world was going through a tremendous economic crisis. And now, as we come out of the pandemic, we are seeing the need for economic recovery, indeed for the largest countries to act in concert, as they say. Remember, the last G20, the one that was hosted by Saudi Arabia, had to be held virtually. So this is the first time after this COVID pandemic has hit the world that the leaders are actually coming together and meeting to try and see what they can do together. So there is absolutely no doubt that economic recovery is something which is topmost in the minds of the leaders. So is, of course, issues such as Afghanistan, how to tackle with those entire issues, including the building humanitarian crisis there, which the Foreign Secretary mentioned today. But you have a couple of issues which are particularly important globally, and where the largest economies of the world are expected to have a major say as a sort of major stakeholder. The Italians are looking at food security in the world. We, on our part, are very keen to look at the entire issue of health security, our own experiences with the pandemic, our abilities to be able to help the world, and especially the developing countries, the fact that we are the largest, one of the largest producers of vaccine, and that we have started our exports once again. All of these are issues of importance to us. And then, of course, I think we just can't lose sight of perhaps the greatest sort of challenge in front of us, which is encapsulated, in fact, in the theme of the G20, planet, prosperity, and people, i.e. climate change. And this is particularly, timing-wise very important. The G20 summit ends on the 31st of October in Rome, and the World Climate Summit, it's the entire UNFCCC, which begins on the 1st of November. For the first 2 days, our first day is sort of mapped out for world leaders to come. and is being billed as the World Climate Summit, and that starts there. We have our Honorable Prime Minister attending both of them. And so therefore, there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that global action, if it has to be charted together and people and large countries have to act in concert, the G20 summit is important. I believe the G20 summit will also be important for giving a kind of signal as far as COP26 is concerned. Let me say something to you. What does the G20 essentially consist of? It consists of the G7 countries, the world's largest Western plus Japan economies, plus the largest developing countries in the world. Now, the G7 met, as you know, some months earlier in the UK. They've taken their own ideas. So essentially, we should be quite clear that the pressure in the G20 will be on the large developing countries, which includes India, that, you need to do something to step up to greater action. Of course, not mindful of the fact that a country like India is among the very few G20 countries which is on track to meet the climate targets of Paris. But you're moving the goalposts, various other things are happening, and indeed, the need of the planet is far more ambitious action. So I think we all need to be prepared that the G20 summit in Rome is going to be an important standard setter for the problems of today, COVID, pandemic, getting out of it, and the problems that are going to affect us in a very long way, which are already affecting us, i.e. climate change.
Right. Sabah Kalam, if I can come to you, as Ambassador Puri just mentioned, the manner in which the G20 and COP26 are scheduled very close to one another, what kind of momentum do you think that could provide to deliberations on climate actions that are absolutely crucial? We'll talk about the UN report that came a few days ago.
Yeah, I think the timing of the G20 meeting and the COP26 meet is very important, and it's very critical. Most of the world leaders who are going to attend G20 are also going to be part of the COP26. We should not forget that G20 represents nearly about 80% of the world's GDP, and it also represents 80% of the world's emission. So these world leaders who are going to attend and make decisions or deliberate upon several issues in G20, and the outcome will feed into the COP26 as well. Of course, in COP26, the major issue is going to be discussion on the Paris Agreement rulebook, as well as carbon neutrality, for which the world is right now looking at, because earlier we used to think that the problem is quite distant. It's going to be for the next generation or the next to next generation. But right now, I mean, the world is seeing that the problem is for this generation. We can't really avoid it. There is the manifestation of the impacts of the climate change is coming in many ways. The floods that we are seeing in Uttarakhand, in Kerala, the drought we have seen in Netherlands. I mean, these places used to see such kind of disasters, but not so frequently. Now, the world has to decide, and I'm quite optimistic about this COP26, this meeting particularly, because the world knows that this is going to be a make or the break year for the entire planet. If we are not going to take crucial decisions, and if we are not going to act right now, then the problem is not going to leave us. It's going to really impact us now, not later. Given the fact that India is doing a lot in terms of climate action, and there have been a lot of targets in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency, which India has posted globally, and India is performing really well. Right. But I think right now, I mean, we need a little bit of more action from everybody. It has to be a contribution from everybody, not only from the government or not only from the global leader. I think, I mean, we need to contribute in whatever way we can as individuals as well. So COP26, I think, is going to be very crucial, and that's going to build confidence of most of the countries, whether we are going to limit the temperature rise to 2 degrees and pursue for 1.5 degrees or not. Because the situation right now is very grim. I mean, the 3 previous reports, the World Economic Forum report, then the IPCC AR6, and even the United Nations Environment Program report on emissions gap, all of them issuing code red for the planet. And if we pursue like this, then most likely we are not going to reach even close to 2 degrees temperature limits. I mean, that's as a world we need to decide. And I think, globally, I think global leaders are quite conscious of this fact, particularly for this COP. And G20, provides sort of a warming space for them to discuss all this, especially at the time of COVID when the world economy is recovering.
Right.
New policies will come in place, investments will come in place. So I think this is the right time to put environmental considerations into the policies and the investment priorities that we make in future.
Right. Ambassador Puri, while conversations on climate action is absolutely crucial, it cannot happen without taking into context climate justice. There's a responsibility that is to be shared in an appropriate manner by developed countries and developing countries. Now, the recent report, Natural Resources Defense Council report, talks about how India, in fact, is walking the talk as far as commitment to the Paris Accord is concerned. In fact, in some cases, it has also exceeded the expectations and commitments. But now that Prime Minister Modi participates in COP26 representing India, what are we to expect? How is India going to finally balance its commitments and also the kind of pressures that it must bear as a developing country?
Vendu, once again, a very important question. Look, I think we should be very clear in our minds. India is a country with huge development challenges and tremendous development imperatives. Now, we as a country, despite all of that, have taken on some of the largest targets suo motu, all by ourselves, not apropos anything that the world has put as a pressure on us, etc. Look at our renewables target, 450 gigawatts by 2030. Most countries agree that hardly anyone in the world is undertaking such kind of action. Our colleague here just mentioned issues of fires, floods, etc. What does it tell you? That, other than simply cutting down the amount of carbon use of fossil fuels, etc., you have no choice but to undertake adaptation on a very large scale. And a country like India is particularly vulnerable, and we have no choice to undertake huge amounts of adaptation action. And we have set up the Global Coalition for Resilience that we have done, disaster resilience, infrastructure we've done. We have taken so many measures, and we've announced a national hydrogen mission, perhaps the one way of getting rid of carbon, which has become the mainstay of the way the world lives its life for the last 200 years, and which is also consequently the reason for the problem. We become global leaders in solar energy, not just setting up the International Solar Alliance, but in terms of the pricing of solar energy, so that everybody in the world thinks that solar energy is the way to go forward, and that would certainly have a major impact in terms of emissions, etc. But I think we also need to be very clear that India is a country which has literally miles to go in terms of its development imperative. And yes, new technologies, solar power, hydrogen, carbon capture are great opportunities, and we are taking a bet on all of them. But we do need greater energy production in India for a better life, for improving the GDP per capita of the people in India. And so for India, the issues of climate justice, the fact that we are the only country where per capita emissions are half of the global average. Right. Please note what I'm saying, half of the global average. Our contribution to the stock of GHGs in the atmosphere is 3%. We are 17% of the world population. And you started this program by quoting the Special Envoy of the United States. Let me just remind your viewers that it's a country which has twice gone back on agreed agreements at the United Nations on climate change, both under a Republican administration and a Democratic administration. So climate justice just can't be given the go-by. Of course, we are not only doing our bit, in fact, it is my considered belief that no matter the outcome of global negotiations, which are about global burden sharing, India will be the place for massive climate action by any standards anywhere in the world in the years to come.
Right. Sabah, one of the important aspects of the upcoming COP26 summit would also be to sort of evaluate who did what from the Paris agreements, things that were agreed upon. UN has time and again said many promises have not been kept. I particularly want to talk about the commitment that was made to provide the developing countries with the requisite technology and funding to mitigate climate challenges. If you could just broadly and briefly take us through what was done by the developed countries on that front over the period of about 8 years.
That's why I said this is going to be a make or break year for the world as well. Look, financing has always been a contentious issue between the developed and the developing countries. The 100 billion mark, which was given per year, has not been met till now, and that's going to be the main responsibility of the COP presidency this time. That this particular topic on financing has to surface during the negotiations, because if developing countries' confidence can't be won by providing adequate financing, then the expectation should not be so high from the developing countries to reduce their emissions. So that's why, it has to be very balanced. Now, if you see how much has been the financing, then that has also been very contentious, because how you account financing is really different for the developed countries and the developing countries.
Right.
So going forward, the first is, of course, making finance available, and making a standardized approach for accounting that finance is also going to be very important.
Right.
Because normal kind of financing in terms of giving projects or ODAs can't be really counted as financing climate finance as far as countries like India are contesting. It should be additional financing over and above the ODAs which developed countries have been giving.
Right. Ambassador Puri, if I can just come to you for a brief comment on the G20. There's been a vision of recovering from the pandemic and really rebuilding the global economy. Just to understand, what are your expectations about the kind of model that we're going to see in a post-pandemic world, if you can imagine that, as far as the global economy is concerned?
This particular summit is coming at a time when the global economy is seeing some shoots. We in India are also seeing a certain degree of recovery. I wish I could turn around and say that this was a summit that's going to chart the way forward to a shooting upwards, V-shaped recovery that the whole world is going to come together. I'm afraid the fact that we are coming together, but that we haven't really decided on any great action, or we haven't been taking it for a long time, in my particular mind means that at least we are trying to do what we can to take things forward. But the fact of concerted action, etc., is something we'll have to see if the summit comes up with. In my opinion, a large part of the summit is going to be devoted to, of course, the issues of Afghanistan, peace and stability, and what will come out of it, the looming humanitarian crisis. Another important part is going to be on trying to see what the G20 as a group of 20, the most developed countries on the other side, the largest developing countries on the other side, can come together on climate. And I'm afraid the pressures will be on the large developing countries, because the developed countries are going to be saying that, look, under the G7 rubric, we've already done what we can. So let me put it like this. I believe that this summit of the G20 is very important. For us, particularly in a different sense, 2 years from now, we're going to be hosting the G20 in India. Therefore, this conglomeration, the premier conglomeration in the world of the world's largest economies, is particularly important for us. We also believe that a upswing in the global economy would be of great advantage as far as a country like India is concerned, in terms of the new supply chains which are being crafted together and so on. But I do think the fact that the climate summit is just after that would be a matter that would tend to, let me say, overshadow the G20 and perhaps also focus its work in that direction, other than, as I mentioned, the humanitarian aspects, the looming humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan.
Right. On that note, Ambassador Manjeev Puri, Sabah Kalam, thanks very much for joining us on Newsnight and sharing your perspective. And moving on, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday underlined the centrality of ASEAN in India's Act East policy and India's vision for wider Indo-Pacific vision. Participating in the 18th India-ASEAN Summit virtually at invitation of Brunei, Prime Minister Modi highlighted India's efforts in the fight against the pandemic in the region. India has contributed medical supplies worth $2 lakh to ASEAN Humanitarian Initiative for Myanmar and $1 million for ASEAN's COVID-19 Response Fund. ASEAN leaders appreciated India's role as a trusted partner in the region, especially during the pandemic with the supply of vaccines.
ASEAN's unity and centrality have always been an important priority for India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in his opening remarks at the 18th ASEAN India Summit on Thursday. Prime Minister Modi said that due to COVID-19, all of us had to face a lot of challenges, which was also a test of India-ASEAN friendship. He added that our mutual cooperation, mutual sympathy will continue to strengthen the relationship in future. He also announced that the year 2022 would be celebrated as the ASEAN India Friendship Year to mark 30 years of India-ASEAN partnership.
कोविड-19 महामारी के कारण हम सभी को अनेक चुनौतियों से जूझना पड़ा, लेकिन यह चुनौतीपूर्ण समय भारत आसियान मित्रता की कसौटी भी रहा। कोविड के काल में हमारा आपसी सहयोग, आपसी संवेदना भविष्य में हमारे संबंधों का बल देते रहेंगे। हमारे लोगों के बीच सद्भावना का आधार रहेंगे। इतिहास गवाह है कि भारत और आसियान के बीच हजारों साल से जीवंत संबंध रहे हैं और इसलिए आसियान की यूनिटी और सेंट्रलिटी भारत के लिए सदैव एक महत्वपूर्ण प्राथमिकता रही है।
Prime Minister Modi also highlighted how history has been a witness of India-ASEAN's vibrant relations over the years and how the role of ASEAN is an important part of India's Act East policy and security and growth for all in the region, Sagar Initiative.
आसियान की यह विशेष भूमिका भारत की एक्ट ईस्ट पॉलिसी, जो हमारी सिक्योरिटी एंड ग्रोथ फॉर ऑल इन द रीजन यानी सागर नीति में निहित है। भारत के इंडो पैसिफिक ओशन इनिशिएटिव और आसियान के आउटलुक फॉर द इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में हमारे साझा विजन और आपसी सहयोग का ढांचा है।
Responding to the ASEAN India Summit, Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, Riva Ganguly Das, informed that various activities will be organized throughout the year to celebrate 2022 as the year of ASEAN India friendship, marking the 30th anniversary of ASEAN India partnership. Riva Ganguly Das stressed at the importance of digital inclusion at the India ASEAN Summit for ensuring comprehensive economic recovery post the pandemic era.
We are the leaders of India and ASEAN have declared the year 2022 as ASEAN India Friendship Year. ASEAN and India will be conducting a series of activities round the year to commemorate this important occasion.
Prime Minister Modi also congratulated the Sultan of Brunei for his successful presidency of ASEAN in 2021. The 10-nation ASEAN is considered one of the most influential groupings in the region, with India and several other countries, including the US, China, Japan and Australia, as its dialogue partners. Bureau Report, DD India.
Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden told Southeast Asian nations on Wednesday that United States would stand with them in defending freedom of seas and democracy and called China's actions towards Taiwan coercive and a threat to peace and stability. Biden's participation in the virtual summit marks the first time in 4 years that Washington has engaged at the top level with the ASEAN bloc that it sees as a key to its strategy of pushing back China.
In a strategic move to rejoin the Indo-Pacific regional affairs and to counter an increasingly assertive China, US President Joe Biden has said that the United States would stand with Southeast Asian allies in defending freedom of the seas, democracy and human rights. Taking part in the broader East Asia Summit, which brings together Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and other nations in the Indo-Pacific region, Biden reaffirmed that the United States was deeply concerned by China's coercive and proactive actions across the Taiwan Strait. Biden also said he would speak out for human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet and the rights of the people of Hong Kong. Speaking at the virtual event, also attended by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on Tuesday, Biden reiterated that the United States had a rock-solid commitment to Taiwan. Biden further backed efforts to hold the Myanmar junta accountable to its commitments to peace. Joe Biden had also committed for the US to spend more than $100 million to further expand America's strategic partnership with the ASEAN on Tuesday. No wonder Southeast Asia has become a strategic battleground between the United States and China. China, which controls most of the South China Sea, has turned up military and political pressure of fiercely democratic Taiwan. It has time and again denied all the allegations. Bureau Report, DD India.
On to some other stories now. Bombay High Court has granted bail to Aryan Khan and 2 other accused in the cruise ship drug case. But the son of Bollywood star Shah Rukh Khan will have to stay in jail for 1 more day due to the lack of a detailed order of the court. In another development, High Court has given major relief to NCB Zonal Director Sameer Wankhede, directing Mumbai Police to give him notice of 3 days in advance if arresting him.
Bollywood actor Shah Rukh Khan's son, Aryan Khan, has been granted bail by the Bombay High Court in the cruise ship drug case. Arbaz Merchant and Munmin Dhamecha were also granted the same relief. The detailed order of the court will come on Friday. Aryan's lawyer, Mukul Rohtagi, said that the 3 accused would come out of jail in 1 or 2 days. Aryan Khan and other accused have been lodged in Mumbai's Arthur jail since October 7.
High Court ने दोनों साइड की दलीलें सुन के 3 अक्यूज को बेल ग्रांट करा है. आर्यन खान नंबर 1, अरबाज मर्चेंट नंबर 2 एंड एक लड़की है उसका नाम है मुनमुन धमेचा. उन तीनों को आज हाई कोर्ट ने बेल दिया है. पक्का डिटेल्ड ऑर्डर कल मिलेगा और मुझे उम्मीद है कि ये तीनों अक्यूज जो हैं ये कल या शनिचर तक बाहर आ जाए.
Justice Nitin Sambre has granted bail to the 3 accused after 3 days of marathon hearing. During this, the NCB strongly opposed the bail to them, citing many reasons, while defense lawyers argued for urgent bail. On October 2nd, a team led by NCB Zonal Director Sameer Wankhede raided the cruise in Mumbai, heading to Goa, and arrested Aryan Khan, Arbaz Merchant and Munmun Dhamecha and others. In another development, Bombay High Court has granted relief from arrest to NCB Zonal Director Sameer Wankhede amid the ongoing confrontation with Maharashtra Minister Nawab Malik. Wankhede has been investigating cruise ship drug case. The agency will have to give first 3 days notice to Sameer Wankhede. Wankhede had filed an application in the Bombay High Court seeking interim protection. Prabhakar Sel, a witness in the Aryan Khan case, has leveled allegations of extortion against Wankhede. Apart from this, Nawab Malik has also leveled several other allegations against the NCB Zonal Director. Another witness in the drug case, Kiran Gosavi, arrested by the anti-extortion cell of Pune Crime Branch, has been remanded to 8 days of police custody by the Pune City Court in a cheating case. With Mumbai Bureau, News Night Desk, DD India.
And Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh visited Terminal Ballistics Research Lab of Defence Research and Development Organisation in Chandigarh, addressing over 500 scientists and officials of DRDO. Raksha Mantri lauded TBRL, which started as a 2-room facility for becoming an important R&D establishment, which is providing crucial defence technologies. He commended the role of laboratory in design and development of multi-mode hand grenade, the first munition manufactured by the private sector for the armed forces, which was handed over to the Indian Army in August this year.
TBRL द्वारा डिजिग्नेटेड, डिजाइन और डेवलप यह ग्रेनेड इंडियन आर्म फोर्सेस में शामिल प्राइवेट सेक्टर द्वारा निर्मित यह पहला म्यूनिशन था जो हैंडओवर किया गया इकोनॉमिक एक्सप्लोसिव लिमिटेड नागपुर के द्वारा। और इस ग्रेनेड की सेफ्टी और परफॉर्मेंस पैरामीटर्स इसे वास्तव में वर्ल्ड क्लास बनाते हैं। ये वर्ल्ड क्लास के इसके परफॉर्मेंस और पैरामीटर्स थे और ये हमारे साइंटिस्ट और प्रोडक्शन एजेंसीज की कैपेबिलिटीज का क्लियर डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन है।
Now, in a major boost to COVID vaccination campaign, Centre will procure 30 crore COVID vaccine doses in the month of November. Government will get 6 crore Covaxin, 22 crore Covishield and 2 crore Zykov vaccine. Har Ghar Dastak Maha campaign will be conducted from 2nd November to 2nd December. Under this, 12 crore doses are to be administered. And Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia said that health was never linked to development in the country in the past. Speaking at inaugural session of CII's Asia Health 2021 on transforming healthcare for better tomorrow, the minister said health earlier meant only treatment. It reflected in budget and government policies. The minister highlighted how Prime Minister Modi has started working on a different aspect of the health sector. He said preventive healthcare can also be part of mainstream healthcare. Now the country is having Khelo India and other such initiatives. The minister also quoted Prime Minister saying that playing can keep people mentally and physically fit. He said Prime Minister also emphasizes on yoga and these are important part of preventive healthcare.
हेल्थ सेक्टर में इन्वेस्टमेंट के लिए भी अपॉर्चुनिटी बढ़ रही है। आज कोई आए और हेल्थ सेक्टर में एक मल्टी स्पेशलिटी हॉस्पिटल चालू करने के लिए डिसाइड करे तो भारत सरकार की ओर से ही उसको सहाय मिल जाएगी, क्योंकि वो आयुष्मान भारत योजना में रजिस्ट्रेशन ले ले तो आज कोई लाभार्थी है उस सरकार में भी जाना चाहेंगे और प्राइवेट में भी जाना चाहेंगे तो उसके ऑटोमेटिक सस्टेन हो जाएंगे। तो कुल मिला के प्राइवेट सेक्टर हेल्थ सेक्टर में इन्वेस्ट करे, इसके लिए भी अपॉर्चुनिटी है।
And France has seized a British trawler for fishing in its territorial waters without a license on Thursday in a dispute over access to fishing grounds after Brexit. Furious that Britain has refused to grant its fishermen the full number of licenses to operate inside of British waters that France says is warranted, Paris announced retaliatory measures on Wednesday. The French government said it would impose extra customs checks on British goods entering France from November 2nd. It is also reviewing a second round of sanctions, including a review of its exports of electricity to Britain. All this would mean more economic pain for Britain before Christmas as it faces labour shortages and rising energy prices. And that brings us to the close of this edition of Newsnight. Namaskar.